Hello, I'm Rabbi Spivak. I'm the rabbi at the Congregation of Moses in Kalamazoo, Michigan. The history of Jews in Kalamazoo and in Michigan in general reflects the history of Jews in the United States. The first sizable immigration of Jews to the United States came after the Civil War. There were Jews here since colonial times, but the numbers particularly increased after the American Civil War when Jews from Germany came to the United States, including Kalamazoo. The later and biggest wave of immigration came in the 1880s, 1890s, and afterward from East Europe. That's when anti-Semitism became particularly intense and deadly in Russia, Poland, and elsewhere in Eastern Europe, and Jews from that area finally fled, many of them to the United States. The Congregation of Moses was founded in the 1890s by East European immigrants. The Congregation of Moses Synagogue on Stadium Drive is the third synagogue in our history. We had two downtown, and then in 1961, this newest synagogue was built. We've been here ever since. One thing you'll find in every synagogue around the world is an ark. An ark is a storage closet at the front of the sanctuary, and inside the ark are copies of the Torah. The Torah is another word for the 5 books of Moses. And we have copies of the 5 books of Moses in the ark because we read some chapters from the 5 books of Moses every morning during Sabbaths and holy days. And the special thing about these particular copies of the Torah that you'll find in the ark is that they are made the same way books were made thousands of years ago. The 5 books of Moses in parchment form are very large. And the reason why we have these books, which look so unlike the books that we're used to reading, is that they remind us of how old the words are, and that when we read the words of the 5 books of Moses on a Sabbath morning this year, we are reading the same words that Jews have read and studied for thousands of years. Passover is a very important holiday because it's a historical holiday. It's based on the history of that event, the liberation from slavery, and the forming of this slave rabble into a people with a very new and different concept of God. Part of the ritual of Passover is the Seder. The Seder is a service. But one of the interesting things about the Seder is that it takes place in the home traditionally. And there's a special prayer book that leads you through the Seder. The prayer book is called the Haggadah. In the Haggadah, one of the prayers says, it's our responsibility as individuals to imagine as though we ourselves had been liberated from Egypt. That's a very important statement because it means that this history is not just in the past, but the history lives in us, and we live as part of that history. In addition to the meal, there are symbolic foods. Probably the best known of all the foods is matzah. Matzah is bread made with only flour and water, nothing else, no yeast. And that comes right out of the story of the Exodus as it's told in the Bible, where the people had to leave Egypt in great haste and didn't have time to make bread the way they normally would. Another symbolic food for the Seder is something called maror, or bitter herbs. Another symbolic food is called charoset. Charoset is sweet like dessert. And during the Seder, we like to mix symbols, and that adds to the complexity of the symbols. So we have the bitter herbs, symbolizing the bitterness of slavery, and the sweet charoset, symbolizing the sweetness of liberation. And then we mix them together, and we have the bitter and the sweet at one moment in one taste. And that is an excellent way of using those symbols because it reflects the complexity of life. Another interesting pairing of symbols is some vegetation like parsley. Passover always takes place in the spring, which is by design, not by accident, because the very season of spring symbolizes new growth and rebirth. And so does the parsley or other vegetation on the Seder plate. And so when we eat the parsley, we are thinking about the new birth of this new nation of Israelites, which became the Jews, and also the potential for new birth and rebirth in every life. Another popular symbol on the Seder table is called the cup of Elijah. It's a cup of wine, and we like to say that the Elijah the prophet visits every Seder and takes a sip of wine out of every cup. And the cup of Elijah is there to look ahead to the future. Most of the Seder is about redemption in the past, during the liberation from slavery in ancient times in Egypt. But Elijah represents redemption in the future. In Detroit and in Washington and elsewhere, there are Holocaust museums. It's very good for our country and for our society to remember the Holocaust, what it was, and the reality of it. The disadvantage of having Holocaust museums is that many people know very little about Judaism, and they walk away thinking that the Holocaust is the totality of Judaism and Jewish history, which of course is not at all the case. Jews have a very rich, very positive history of contributions to Western civilization, and also, aside from that, a rich and rewarding religion and culture in which to live over many centuries. So the history of Jews and Judaism is not simply a history of victims and victimology. It is also a history of a rich, complex, interesting religious and cultural tradition. And that continues in Kalamazoo to this very day.